This is the Plenty Podcast coming at you on a Wednesday evening. I think this will be dropped on a Saturday morning, though. So if you're listening, happy Saturday, happy morning, happy afternoon, whenever you're listening, however you're listening, welcome. Today we are talking about perspective and social media and sort of the understanding within it all. Cameron, welcome to the show. How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing chill. I took a nap, feeling relaxed and ready to go.
Hell yeah. So we just recorded this lovely episode. It was nice. You know, it's refreshing to talk about the stuff that other people aren't talking about, just in terms of social media and the lies of social media, the lies of all of our lives that we put forth, because, you know, Instagram makes it all seem like it's all flowery and happy, but we all know the truth. It's fucking not. It's a miserable world sometimes. Sometimes it feels like it's endless suffering, all that fun shit. You know the vibes.
Facts.
Make sure, you know, if you're enjoying this podcast, make sure you're liking, you're following, you're subscribed on YouTube, you're following on Spotify, following on Apple Podcasts, following our Instagram, following our Twitter at plan_C_podcast. Give us a rate on Apple Podcasts, because, you know, it helps us a lot. We're soon going to have our stuff posted on latanique.news, so make sure you check that out. Shout out to my boss AJ for hooking that up. Really appreciate him. Cameron, you got anything else before we get into it?
No, not really. Just hope y'all enjoy your day.
Yeah, hope you enjoy your day, and remember, understand your fellow person and listen and ask questions. Don't just spew information. You'll never learn anything. That's not the way this works. Yeah, if you ain't got anything else, let's get into it. And we are back. As you can tell by the title and our lovely, lovely intro, today we're talking about perspective in social media. Cameron, what are we talking about specifically today?
Well, today we are going to be talking about how our perspective as an individual might lead us to not necessarily understand each other, as well as the benefits and the pros and cons of social media and cancel culture. Those will be our main topics today.
There we go. You heard it here first. So I think starting with perspective, sort of baseline perspective, is important because social media, a big part of social media is perspective, and the perspective we have on others and sort of the perspective that we put forth for others, right? And starting with that, you know, I think talking about how, you know, the fact that people get so frustrated with others' decisions and their sort of decision making in critical times, and the fact that, you know, we will never be able to understand the decisions other people make, right?
Yeah.
And so this idea where people say, oh, you know, if I was in their shoes, I would have done this. And sort of being like, well, hold on now. If you were in their shoes, you would have made the exact decision they made. And there's little factors that we can't see, we can't hear, we don't understand, that are in people's minds that sort of tip those scales. Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
I think that because we're all inside, and I think this has kind of brought forth a kind of mindset, and it's brought forth an issue in that we're only necessarily gaining information through media, social media generally. It's not usually per se like research or anything like that.
Yeah,
So
and it's not talking to each other either.
yeah, and it's not like real communication. And so we're all kind of gaining these scraps of knowledge on like a wide variety of situations and drama and all this and all of these things. But because we are collectively only gaining scraps of information, those scraps of information are now considered knowledge. Because I feel like earlier or like before we were all inside, as well as before we had social media, you would have to actually have done some research and you'd have to have actually feel it. There'd be a different what would it be called? Threshold. There'd be a different threshold for when you can say that you formed an opinion and it'd be worth sharing versus now I feel like people are very quick to share judgments and criticisms if people don't necessarily line up to their own way of thinking.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good point because we all have not only perceptions of each other, but sort of hopes and ideals for each other, where, you would hope somebody wasn't getting back together with a really toxic ex or something, right? And, we don't know what's going on in their day-to-day lives and we don't know what's going on in their thinking. So it's so easy just to be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, he treated you like this or she treated you like this and you're going to get back together with them? Like, what the fuck? And, I'm not advocating for getting back together with your toxic ex. I think I feel quite the opposite. But sort of the idea that again, we are so quick to rush to judgment based off of a speck of information or like such a little percentage of information. And there's little things that when you're in your own head, it's so hard to judge reality from your own emotions and what you're telling yourself, right? Because it's like, oh my God, I feel this way, I feel this way, I feel this way. And this is the way it has to be, or this is the way it is. But it's like, actually, reality is different, bitch.
No, I think that's a really great example, especially like I feel like we've all had situations, or even I feel like we all naturally kind of do this, where, for example, if your friend is dating someone and they're having problems, usually you'll only get or you'll only speak on the more negative aspects of that person. And I feel like this happens all between men and also between women, where they generally only hear these kind of negative aspects because that's what will paint the narrative. And so
Yeah,
that the friend,
you want that positive perception and you want your friend to be on your side.
exactly. So that friend generally all of a sudden has a kind of negative attitude towards the significant other, despite that only being from a very narrow amount of information that was given to them. And that information essentially is taken as truth. And I feel like that kind of expands to almost every event or situation, whether you're receiving your information from specific people on social media, you're receiving your information from certain personalities. I feel like a lot of situations kind of lend it to that type of dynamic.
No, it's so true because again, we want the narrative in our favor no matter what it is, right? And so it's not, we're not twisting facts all the time, but we'll just omit stuff that, might change the perception or, make it so that the other person questions it. And it's sort of that lack of faith in the other person to just be a true friend that I find so interesting, because it's like, oh, wait, you're not telling me everything because you want me to have a positive perception of the situation that you're in.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it also is also like a fear of judgment, which I think has become like increasingly apparent is that, like, which makes sense now considering cancel culture and everything like that. But there's such like it feels like everyone's so afraid of being judged for anything negative that they have to constantly only put forth positivity or like positive things about themselves or others. Otherwise, it'll make them be judged in a negative light. And I'm not sure exactly. Like, I guess I can understand kind of like why naturally people just want to be liked and people want to be kind of appreciated. But I do think in the long run, I think it really weakens kind of some of the bonds that you might have with other people. Because personally, I find that the people that I've shared some sort of negative experience with, or we've gone through something that might have been not necessarily great. But once you face those types of challenges, I think bonds become stronger. But when they're just based off of like positivity and just like kind of like only good things, they become kind of vapid. And I feel like sometimes I can even sort of replace those conversations I've had with other conversations with other people that I have that similar kind of only positive, only nice relationship with, and they would fit through seamlessly. So there's like, it's almost as if you're becoming less of an individual by putting forth
this rosy,
this
these
yeah
these
this
rose
rosy
tinted these rose
yeah
tinted glasses picture of
which
yourself.
yeah which is like they can be kind of different because of whatever you're doing or your hobbies or whatever like that, but it's like it's all kind of it's not necessarily like a complete individual that you're kind of showing.
Yeah,
So
and I think that's a lead into what we want to sort of talk about next, where so much of not only the internet, but I think people these days, we sort of talk at each other rather than try and understand and ask questions. Why do you think it's gotten to this point where we're sort of so dug in, and rather than trying to understand, we just relate for a half a second and we go, oh, yep, it be like that. Because I find, especially with like mental health, that is such an issue.
I think it's because like it's almost like a form of selfishness or
Mm,
like it's like I think it's because I find that normally when I'm having any conversation that might be kind of controversial in any shape or form, people generally come to the conversation as if they are right when they're entering the conversation before anything has even been said.
yeah,
And I find that when people are coming from that perspective, then it immediately makes it so no positive aspect can come from that conversation. There can be no positive result. Because if you believe that you're right from the beginning, then it means that you're not willing to have your mind changed, or you're not acknowledging your lack of knowledge in the subject, or what could possibly be what you could possibly learn from the other person. And then it just becomes people kind of talking over each other. That's when you'll see a lot of interruptions. You'll see this a lot when it comes to like, I think we're from New York, so we're more, the people that we talk to are going to be more on the left in terms
oh
of
yeah,
the political spectrum.
yeah,
And
big old
you'll
echo
never
chamber.
you will yeah, facts. You will never see more people talk over each other than people on the left trying to kind of virtue signal or kind of trying to posit whatever their opinion being in the moral right. And I think this interesting aspect of morality coming more and more into the forefront of media, of basically saying, if you're by tying together your kind of personality and your individuality with your opinions, there's now this strong moral tie that makes it so that when someone doesn't agree with you, it feels like an attack. You know what
Mm,
I mean? It's
yeah,
like you can't be wrong because it would essentially trip a bunch of breakers on your other opinions, and your structure would essentially fall apart. And that's why you'll never like people that are going to be like this can never admit that they're wrong in any aspect,
right.
because if they're wrong in any specific aspect, then the rest of their opinions will kind of fall apart.
Yeah, because it's so sort of tied to who they are at this point.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that it's another great segue into sort of the distortions that we put forth on social media, and sort of wearing this mask, and being this persona that emits lots of info, or just maybe some info. I know there's some sad boys out there on Instagram, but with Instagram, especially, maybe a little bit of Twitter too. I kind of put Twitter on the opposite end of the spectrum, but with Instagram, it's so easy to just take a nice photo of yourself, smile, nice caption, boom. You could be depressed as shit. You could be depressed as fuck. But like, why do we only have these positive information, like sort of inputs on social media? Why do you think that is?
I think that's because I don't know where down the line it became kind of confused, but I do believe that the point of Instagram is to kind of receive personal dopamine from people liking your stuff,
Mm,
whether it be from people saying, "Oh, I wish I could be like you," or "That's amazing," or like "You look great," whatever it is. The point of Instagram and why individuals have Instagram is to get that dopamine from that situation. And I find that the natural reaction for people is like, oh, if I want people to like my stuff, I have to put forth this image of like, grandeur. You know what I mean? People love seeing, like, the way that people love celebrities. People put themselves in these situations in which people can admire them. And, while that may sound good, and I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think it's not bad to want to look good for people. I mean, I feel like we all do it in general.
well, yeah,
I do think
we
when
all want to be the best form of ourselves.
Exactly, I do think it creates a culture of falsitude,
Mm,
because if everyone's looking great but it's not real, then it means that no one is really.
yeah,
Kind of like some syndrome shit
I
from
was literally
from
just
the
gonna
fucking
say the
Incredibles, bro.
syndrome shit, bro. I was
From the
literally just gonna
Incredibles.
say that.
And I think that the problem with that is that if everyone's putting forth this rose garden of you're in Miami and you're in a swimsuit and you're on the beach or whatever, but you know that you're not actually there even though you're putting it out, then you're comparing your real self to these imaginary selves of other people.
Mm,
And I feel like when that happens, it becomes the comparison effect that would be giving you dopamine now has the kind of opposite effect. And
right.
that kind of leads me to a question I have for you, which is, do you think that people subconsciously or consciously compare themselves to each other on Instagram? And do you find yourself doing that at times?
Yeah, so I think with the inherent nature of Instagram, the fact that again we are trying to sort of put forth our best self, and you're not posting those days when you're crying in bed. You're not posting selfies. I feel fucking terrible. Like I, I want to die. Turn it all off. Please, please. We're not posting that.
Yeah.
So, I think it's so easy when we see somebody post a picture that that you look at and you're like, wow, like they were feeling themselves in this photo. Like, what? I think it's so easy to sort of have that reaction because again, we see what we want to see. And
Yeah.
so I do it. I as I've gotten older, I have tried to sort of compare less because I find that when I am comparing, it's shallow and it's a quick fix, right? We do get that short little burst of dopamine, but then after, it's like, what was that for? you know,
Yeah.
and it's sort of the shitty feeling afterwards because it's like when they then win and you're down, you're like, oh, well, what the fuck? And when you're sort of I think there's this thing people do like to do a lot where they sort of hate follow people and they like to feel that sort of vitriol towards somebody when they see their posts and it's like, oh, like this is what they're putting out. Like, oh my God, like trash. And, I think the way Instagram is structured, and the way that as a society we operate on Instagram, it's so easy to fall into that. It's whether it's like art, music, just a selfie, looking at an ex's profile and being like, oh, yeah, I was hotter than, their new person that they're seeing type shit. It's so easy to do that because we're given such little information.
Yeah, I agree, because it's kind of like, it's also, I do find myself comparing myself to others. I personally only have my Instagram for art, but I even find myself comparing myself to other artists and stuff like that, whether I'm like, oh, that's a really great photo, I can't do that, or anything like that, or even the more negative stuff like, oh, wow, this person has like a huge amount of followers, but I draw better than that, whatever it may be. And
I had that moment yesterday. I was on YouTube, and I watched one of those like YouTube TikTok equivalents, and that shit was trash, and it had 1.2 million likes. And I was like, this is ridiculous. It was literally it was some kid. He took Mentos, put it in a Coke bottle, tied it to a weight, threw it in a pool, and then just waited. And nothing fucking happened. And it was like 1.2 million of you were like, yes, this is incredible. And again, it's so easy just to like immediately like judge. And there's so much sort of vapidness on social media that it becomes so easy.
Yeah, but there's like really no value in like tying your ego to anything related to social media at all. Which can become a problem when it becomes kind of your business and whatnot. But
literally
that's kind of
like
another topic.
Monetary ties to social media. Yeah, I hear you. Because then it's like, what are you gonna say?
I was gonna tie. I was gonna tie what we were talking about before kind of also to Twitter, because in terms of when you were talking about hate following and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I find that I don't use Twitter that much, but when I do, I see a lot of topics, the majority of topics essentially just being like hate topics about like certain people. And it's interesting because it's not like what anyone says on Twitter has any like effect or value on the real world, except for it's like maybe impact towards their followers.
Right.
But at the same time, people always find this need to kind of like, whether it be, a rapper, whether it be, I don't know, Elon Musk, or whether it be whoever, it's like people just find this need to really form an opinion on someone and essentially just hate on them for no real reason or value. And I don't personally do it because I don't find a value in it. So, but I'm not taking the high ground on this one. I do think that there is some sort of reason people do it.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily sure why.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point, because I know with myself, I use Twitter largely for information, if that makes sense. Whether it's looking at stuff the New York Times or Washington Post has posted, or even stuff like looking at, what the right is doing, whether it's looking at, the Daily Wire or New York Post or something like that. And, you go under those comments, and it's a fucking bloodbath. People are just so much just attack. And it's so easy these days just to type out a tweet and being like, you're stupid. These are the 3 reasons you're stupid. Tweet. And then you don't think about it. There's so many people that do that on Twitter. I think
it's like the majority.
Yeah. And I think with the Trump administration and the rise of cancel culture, it sort of made that more prevalent, because the voices got louder because there was a certain morality tied to it where you would be like, oh, you believe this? Like, you're inherently a bad person.
Oh, for sure.
And yeah.
Yeah. And it's also really interesting because when I look at Twitter, it kind of saddens me because I feel like it has such potential to be like a great way of like people kind of relating to each other and stuff like that. And it's just like really not the case because like I'll like, for example, I'll look through a Twitter thread and I'll look, well, how many people are actually like posing questions? Because
Oh,
I feel
no.
like no
Oh,
one, no one
nobody.
asks, nobody asks questions on Twitter, which means that if there are no questions, then no one's actually trying to learn everything. Everyone's just trying to say something. And it's interesting because it really kind of baffles me in terms of like, well, why do you think that what you're saying is so important? Like I really can't necessarily understand it. It's like I don't know, like are like if everyone just decided they're an expert on whatever topic, but it's like everyone has this like super strong opinion on something that they have like really no ties to, and I think it might just be because like the internet has given us so much information that we can gather that we somehow think if we gather a little, that means that we have some sort of thing that's worthwhile to say.
Mm.
But I do think in the future that people would, I wish people would kind of hold each other to task a bit more in terms of their knowledge information. And
Well, it's impossible.
yeah, and yeah, it is. Well, maybe it is. We'll see. I mean,
Well, I think
I
I
feel
think
like,
right now in our culture it is.
yeah. I mean, I feel like we purity test a lot, but just like not in the right ways.
Mm. No, that's a great point.
Yeah. But
Um,
I actually have a question for you on about Twitter,
yeah,
which
please.
is after learning about something on Twitter, do you feel that you have enough knowledge to form a proper opinion on it?
I actually I do this thing where I never want to tweet at people. I never want, even no matter how wrong they are, I never want to be like, no, you're wrong. Blah, 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 here's why, X, Y, Z. Blah, blah, blah. I never want to do that. And I find if I'm on Twitter and I see stuff that's making me angry, I try and understand more. Whether it's do a little more research or look at where this person is getting their information from. So it's not necessarily forming opinions as much as it is like trying to understand. But granted, that's like maybe 40% of the time. The rest of the time, I'm just like, oh, you're getting angry. Close the app. Stop. This is a negative experience now. Stop, stop, stop. you know?
Yeah,
And I think
for sure. But I go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think I don't want to be preachy here, but I think some people could benefit from that. Just being like, I don't understand this person's perspective, so let me try. And if I'm not going to try, let me at least remove my emotion from it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. One thing that I also just kind of want to touch on is like I'm of the opinion that I'm not sure if it's a controversial opinion or not, but I'm of the opinion that any information that is like on Twitter or on social media is can only be used as a lead-in to look for other information. I don't think that there is any, whether it be about an event, whether it be about a person, whether it be about anything, any type of thing that we research on social media has, I think it has like the bottom of the barrel of value in terms of
Oh yeah.
information, which means like I can never actually form an opinion based on anything that I see on social media, whether it be, oh, so and so did such and therefore we can't support him because of whatever reason, even if it's terrible, unless I've done the otherwise research, I personally abstain from creating an opinion.
Yeah, and
I'm
I think it's so hard to get caught up in that side because the mob justice on the internet right now is such a machine. And it's
Yeah.
like, and it's actually a runaway locomotive that literally nobody is going to be spared. So, you have like 15-year-olds getting canceled for shit they did when they were, younger, or like people who were on Twitter when they were younger and they said some stupid shit. And it's like, I don't, obviously people who do terrible things, they should pay the price, right? Obviously. But there's a certain amount of like humanness that's taken out of it, because as humans, we're going to make mistakes. And I think that when you have people walk such a tight rope in terms of trying to balance what they say, their opinions, this, that, and the third, it's so hard because half of us are getting our opinions from our fucking parents and our grandparents and shit, because that's literally all we know. And that ties back into perspective, where it's like, well, you can't begin to understand because you're not in their head. And I'm not out here, I'm not making excuses for white supremacists or shit like that. Obviously, that's some bad shit. But, if a 12-year-old in Iowa says the N-word, like, it's bad, yeah, but they don't realize what they're doing. They're literally too ignorant to realize it. So when people just like fucking cave in on them, it's so hard for me to be like, yep, that kid's evil, because it's like, he literally doesn't know any better.
Yeah, I mean, like, I completely agree. Like, I feel like with a lot of this cancel culture stuff, like, I feel like we all have kind of things that mistakes that we've made. Like, I personally had interactions that I wish I'd done differently, especially when I was a kid. You say, like, use the R word, back in the day, like middle school, yeah. Things that you didn't fucking know.
Yeah,
like,
shit that you think about, as you're trying to go to sleep.
Yeah, but like, personally, I take a more extreme opinion on like, in terms of like when you said like, oh, like, well, I don't make excuses for white supremacists or whatever like that. I find that we deal with people, even if they're a white supremacist or a whatever you don't like, whether it be, if you maybe don't like socialists, maybe you don't like people who like the baby. I don't know. whatever your thing is. I find that people think that because they're irredeemable, that it gives them carte blanche to kind of like approach people with hate. And I find that never works. And this is coming from like, also specifically when a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff was happening. I found like a lot of the time people were like, oh, well, if you're not with the movement, or you're not trying to understand, then like you're this and you're that, and like we shouldn't have to and like, this is something, a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, I think it's a very good example, is when and this also is a bit controversial, but the sentiment that Black people shouldn't necessarily have to explain their situation to white people, and that white people should be necessarily like learning about it on their own so they can have a better understanding. And I heard and I hear this a lot, and in my opinion, it's bullshit. It's fucking bullshit. And the reason I think it's bullshit is because if you want to be understood, why is it someone else's responsibility to educate themselves on how to understand you? Like, it doesn't make any sense, because no one is more important than someone else. If you want to be understood, then you do have the responsibility to explain it and make someone understand, not make someone, but give someone the opportunity to understand, rather than try and say it's their fault for not doing the correct research. Because why would they? They have no reason to. There's no inherent value of doing so. And I think that type of attitude is something that we see a lot in social media, in terms of, oh, this person's a racist, therefore they're a terrible person, therefore I can say whatever I want. And it's like, well, now that you've said whatever you want and you've kind of shit on this person, do you think that they're any more likely to change their opinion? or less likely to change their opinion. It's like, well, how much good have you done to your own cause by acting this way? Like,
Yeah,
sure, you might have scratched an itch, but at the same time, this person may look at you and go, oh, so that's how they think of me. That's how all of them think of me. And now you've created something worse than what was before.
yeah, like, congrats, you dunked on this person. But, like, now you have pushed them in the other direction further. Like, you have literally done the
Exactly.
opposite of what you have tried to do, or what what you say you want to do, or what you say your intentions are, because you have pushed them so far in the other direction.
Yeah.
All right, before we get out of here, I think I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think that people being honest on their feed would be taken as a sign of weakness or as a call for attention in our current climate as a society? Like on their Instagram, if they were just like, wow, I'm feeling so fucking terrible today. Like, everything sucks, feeling suicidal today. Like, do you think that people would be like, ugh, I can't believe they posted that. They clearly just want attention.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's because of the culture that we all know that everything's fake. So, and it's because we're coming from the position that it's fake that all of a sudden someone being genuine can also be seen as fake. And that's the problem with everyone having these false images, is that then all of a sudden there's nothing of value and there's no truth behind any of the personalities. And like, sure, it's rare that you come across maybe a channel or a feed or something like that where someone's being very raw and being very real across their entire feed, like in terms of it might not be the case if that's how they act all the time, if they have their positives and negatives in their daily life on their social media. But then I find that people say, oh, that person's oversharing or something like that. And it's like, it's totally backwards. And I find that we definitely change that with, I don't know, maybe like a few times a week. Maybe if you post say 5 times a week, have 1 or 2 of those times be something that's not necessarily something positive or something that you want people to know about you. And I think that if we were a little bit more honest, I think it would do a very good service, especially to people that are like younger than us, who don't necessarily have this knowledge that everything on social media is not real. And it really affects their mentalities and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. And I completely agree, because it's like, it's so easy to be like, oh, they're just virtue signaling, or oh, they're just sharing that because it's easy. They don't actually care. It's the black square thing, where it's like it was so easy just to post a black square that, it's so easy just to be like, yes, they are for the cause. Or just be like, what, you posted a black square? Like, are you going to protest? Are you doing this, that, and the third? And like, it could be taken both ways. And that's what's just so tough about the sliver of information you get. And that ties back in with perspective, baby. And just the lack of understanding. So understand your fellow man.
Oh, for sure. I have a question. I guess my last question for
Let's do it
you
before we
would
get
be
out of here.
yeah, well, I personally, like, I only use Instagram for my art and promotion. Like, I don't take pictures of myself that often, so I don't really have many pictures of myself to post per se. But I was wondering, like, what's it like having an Instagram that is essentially promoting like yourself, and like, do you feel like a pressure to promote a certain image or to like fit a certain mold per se?
Ooh, I mean, I that's such a tough question, because I want to be able to be like, yeah, I'm doing this, that, and the third. Like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. Like, blah, blah, blah. But, that's not the truth. That's not the fucking truth. And I think for me personally, it's so easy to like post fun memories or post fun photos or post photos where I look good. But I also think personally, I think having this podcast helps me a lot with the other side of it, where I can say on air, I can be like, yeah, the last 3 months have been a struggle. They really have. And, I've had moments where I've been really down bad, and I've had days where I don't want to get out of bed, whether it was, thinking about somebody who's no longer in my life, or, thinking about just the daunting nature of the future. And so I know obviously the podcast isn't huge, so it's so much easier to be open on the podcast because it's not being, it's not being showcased, because it's so much more information rather than a single Instagram post. But for me, again, it's so hard to strike the balance of being like, look at all I've done, / this is actually what's happening. For the listeners, I have spent the month of March being sober. And that's not something I've done probably since I was in high school. I was smoking a ton of pot, and I was feeling really depressed, and I decided to stop. And I've had moments where I've been like, hey, it would be cool to share this on Instagram or whatever. But I also, there's also a fear that people are gonna be like, oh, he's just rubbing it in our face, like, oh, he this, that, and the third. So I think I'm definitely more comfortable with sharing on a podcast, because I feel this podcast is much more of a reflection of myself and of what's really going on versus my Instagram. But you can find the podcast on the Instagram. So there you go.
Kind of the best of both worlds. And I kind of like, as we're kind of winding this podcast down, well, I do feel like we've talked about a lot of the negative aspects of social media and perspective. I also do think that there are some silver linings, some silver linings in the silver sandwich, as Zuko would say.
Oh, yeah.
Social media does give people a chance to really see the other side in terms of their opinions, where before you wouldn't necessarily know what other people are thinking, and people have differences of opinion. Now we can actually see it, and we can interact with it, even if we aren't necessarily doing so in a healthy way yet.
Yeah.
And I do think it does offer kind of connection between people that is kind of unheard of, in terms of connections to people in different states as well as around the world.
I'd agree.
And allows people to find their kind of tribe within the space. Hopefully those tribes don't necessarily become echo chambers, which is what we see a lot of. But it does give people the opportunity to really expand their perspective and learn more about other people if that's what they choose to do. Totally. And hopefully, as we move forward and the people of the first social media generation become older and really become adults, we'll see a bit more of a responsibility how people present themselves on social media, as well as how we kind of hold each other to task and really make this a more respectful place for people growing up now, younger than us, to inhabit, as well as for ourselves and for our own mental health. I think it's a possibility. I'm not sure how likely it will be, but I do think it's an opportunity to really do some good.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, the problem is there's just not a blueprint yet.
Yeah.
There's no right way to do social media, really.
Yeah.
All right. You got anything else before we get out of here?
I am selling stickers. Those are going out into my first batch. If you want one, DM me at Stolo, STO_LO. Get your sticker. Do your thing.
Get your sticker. I got some of my own. Fire as fuck. Very proud of them. Thank you for listening to this episode. We got this is one of the episodes we got a little personal. I love the episodes it's really refreshing. Because a lot of the time, we're talking about sports, we're interviewing somebody, and it's not necessarily the place to get personal. But that's why I like doing the one-on-ones with you, Cameron, because it's a time and place. So I appreciate you for talking to me and all that. Make sure you are liking, sharing, subscribing, following us on Spotify, following us on Apple Podcasts, checking out previous podcasts. We do a weekly sports show called What Happened This Week, where I do a 15-minute show, break down sort of stuff that happened in the week of sports, whether they actually happened that week or it's just whatever I want to talk about that week in sports. So make sure you're checking that out. Make sure you're following at plan_C_podcast, Twitter, Instagram. Oh, my dog is barking. And yeah, thank you for listening. Wear a mask. Hope you're staying safe.
Peace.